Do a Google search of Frank Daniels Jr. You'll notice that one of the first entries is a link to a story on the Neiman Journalism Lab website, written by a former News and Observer employee, Jim Barnett. Not long after I landed my first reporting job at the Raleigh News and Observer in 1988, the publisher and primary owner, Frank Daniels Jr., walked into the newsroom one day, handed the cop reporter a speeding ticket he had just received on Interstate 40, and told the reporter to write about it for the next day's paper. As far as I know, it was the only time Frank ever demanded that a news story be published in his own newspaper. Frank stayed away from his newsroom for one simple reason. He knew that meddling was a bad idea. No reporter or editor worth his or her salt would ever want to be associated with a newsroom where the publisher determined what beats got covered and what stories got written. It's the type of thing that happens in newsrooms all over the state. But the incident stood out in this reporter's mind because it involved the scion of a famed newspaper family in North Carolina and one of the state's leading major newspapers. Frank Daniels Jr.'s story begins long before his birth. His grandfather, Josephus Daniels, was born in Washington, North Carolina during the Civil War. Though he read for the law and was admitted to the bar, his passions were newspapers and the Democratic Party. He bought a newspaper in Wilson and was part owner of papers in Kinston and Rocky Mount. He was designated North Carolina's official state printer in 1887. 7 years later, the News and Observer of Raleigh, created from a merger of 3 newspapers, went bankrupt. Josephus Daniels then purchased the paper for $10,000 in a county auction. When Josephus died in 1948, the family business was left to his 4 sons. Firstborn Josephus Jr. was active as a business manager of the News and Observer. Another son, Worth, became a doctor and moved to Washington, D.C. Jonathan Daniels served as editor, while Frank A. Daniels became president and publisher. Frank's grandfather was born during a great national crisis. Frank Daniels Jr. came into the world during another, the Great Depression. Like his cousins, he grew up in the family business. He got his fair share of ink on his hands, but admitted in a 1990 interview that he didn't have printer's ink running through his veins. At 14, he spent his summer as an office boy. A year later, he was collecting for the classified ad department. He earned a degree in history from UNC Chapel Hill in 1953, attending law school the last year. The next year, he married Julia Bryan Jones, a New Bern native and graduate of Converse College in Spartanburg, South Carolina. Prior to marrying Frank Jr., Julia was an elementary school teacher. They have 2 children, Frank III and Julia Graham Daniels. Frank Jr. served in the Air Force in the United States and Japan, then returned in 1955 to immerse himself in the family business. He served in many roles at the newspaper: treasurer, business manager, general manager, co-publisher, and executive vice president. In 1968, Frank's uncle Jonathan retired as editor, and in 1971, his father retired as publisher. Famed journalist Claude Sitton took over as editor, while Frank Jr. became publisher and president of the company. His time as publisher coincided with a steady population boom in Wake County. The census recorded 239,000 residents in 1970. By 1990, that number had nearly doubled. The company also grew with purchases of newspapers in Cary, Smithville, Waynesville, and elsewhere in both North and South Carolina. Frank Jr. kept an eye on the future. The News and Observer was an early adopter of computers back in the 1970s. In 1993, when few people had even heard of the Internet, the NNO launched NandoNet, the nation's first online service provider and electronic newspaper. Frank believed in being an active participant in the industry. In 1980, he served as president of the North Carolina Press Association, a post previously held by his father and grandfather, and later by his nephew, David Warnock. He served as chairman of the board of the Associated Press and president of the Southern Newspaper Publishers Association, the Newspapers Publishers Foundation, and the Newspaper Bureau of Advertising. In 2011, SNPA honored Daniels with the Frank W. Mayborn Leadership Award. By 1995, Daniels could see how the newspaper business and the world was rapidly changing. To keep up with a growing community requires capital, he said, and our access to capital was limited. That year, McClatchy Newspapers purchased the News and Observer Company. Daniels retired in 1996. But that didn't mean the end of his newspaper career. That year, along with Jack Andrews, Frank Daniels III, Lee Dirks, and David Warnoff, he purchased a paper in Southern Pines, The Pilot. He continues to serve as chairman of that paper, and Warnoff serves as publisher. Through his generosity and personal work, the Daniels name has become a symbol of community service to the region, state, and nation he loves. He has served as chairman of the Smithsonian Institution National Board, the Triangle United Way, the United Arts Council, and many more organizations. He was a trustee of St. Mary's College and Peace College, served on the Board of Governors of the University of North Carolina System, and currently serves on the Appalachian State University Board of Trustees. In 2007, a professorship in the UNC School of Education was named for Frank Daniels Jr. by his close friend, C.D. Spangler, former president of the University of North Carolina, honoring his longtime support of educational causes. In the healthcare field, he has served as chairman of the Rex Hospital Board of Trustees, the University of North Carolina Memorial Hospital, and president of the Cerebral Palsy Center of Wake County. He and his wife Julia have been key benefactors for the North Carolina Museum of Art, the North Carolina Museum of History, and the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences. Larry Wheeler, director of the Art Museum, appreciates not only the gifts of money from the Daniels family, but the gifts of wisdom. He's the one I go to sound out new ideas and get strategic advice, he said. A new wing of the Museum of Natural Sciences is scheduled to open in April. The director, Betsy Bennett, credited Daniels with providing the leadership to get the Nature Research Center built and having the museum become the state's first Smithsonian affiliate, followed by the North Carolina Museum of History. Frank's philanthropic efforts in service to the state was recognized by the presentation of the North Carolina Award, the state's highest honor in the field of public service. The citation for that award stated, in part, his willingness to tackle projects from the creation of the Greater Triangle Community Foundation to donating funds to improve lighting in downtown Raleigh is without peer. He has been inducted into the Raleigh Hall of Fame along with many other honors. In an interview in 1999, Daniels said, "A newspaper person needs to be a part of the community and be concerned. It's the natural thing to do, and I enjoy it." For his long-standing service to his community, to his state, to his nation, and to his industry, for his generosity to those in need, for the honor and respect he has brought to North Carolina, the North Carolina Press Association names Frank Arthur Daniels Jr. its 2012 North Carolinian of the Year.